Hello, I'm Dalton DeLand. I'm a columnist for the Berkshire Eagle, and this is Eagle Reels, where we take you beyond the news. Our special guest today, Lauren Graves, Associate Curator for the Boston Athenaeum. Welcome, Lauren.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. So, a real summertime treat at the Boston Athenaeum is Edwin Hale Lincoln's Wildflowers of New England. What were you hoping to achieve with this exhibition?
That's a great question. We were hoping to achieve with this exhibition to teach our visitors a lot about wildflowers and native plants in our New England region. We really wanted to highlight the work of this mostly unknown photographer who was a Berkshire-based photographer, Edwin Hale Lincoln, and appreciate his incredible artistic talent and photographic eye, as well as his real dedication to preserving and conserving native plants of the region. We hope too, when visitors come to the exhibition, they'll not only appreciate his artistic ability and the real beauty of the plants, but also leave with a desire to learn more about native plants and how they themselves can also promote and conserve wildflowers and native plants in our region.
Okay, so given what you just said about conserving the wildflowers, is there then, do you feel in his work or in your curation or both, is there that environmental or preservation aspect?
Sure. So Lincoln is working at a time when wildflower preservation movements sort of begin to rise, and that's linked to a lot of different political and social movements of the time, also nationalism in the United States, in this real effort to promote America as having these special native plants. And so Lincoln is sort of a part of that conversation, and also at a time when our industrialization is ramping up, and the planet and the landscape is really changing, and so there was this desire to kind of like conserve and preserve our native plants. And so Lincoln is starting this project sort of at the same time as there is this larger kind of preservation movement. Lincoln he talks about in his own writing and his interviews that he felt like photography was the ideal medium in which to really preserve for future generations these native plants. So he not only is a part of these kind of conversations and circles, but he says himself, in prefaces to his books, that he is wanting to use photography to really preserve the beauty of wildflowers for future generations. So he says that, and I think you can also really read it in his work. He has such an intense, you could say even an obsession with native plants, with wildflowers, and he really photographs each plant to highlight the plant's individuality and kind of personality. So he is really trying to showcase, botanical art as having, and flowers themselves as having this sort of beauty and personality that goes beyond them. So I think he is parts of these conversations, and he's also dedicated in the way that he actually captures the flowers. He's really trying to kind of share his love for these plants.
You touched on something that was struck me about this work. There's the sort of artistic still life part, and
Mhm.
then there's a quality of it and the way it's, set against, you know, white or whatever that is almost scientific, sort of like, pinning a butterfly to a page. What do you think of that? Am I correct? Is there sort of merger of artistry and science here?
Definitely. That's a great observation. And so Lincoln himself was very aware of the sort of centuries-long legacy of botanical printing and of sort of botanical art. And we know that he was aware of the work of New England artists like Isaac Sprague and other botanical painters that are working up in Maine. And so, and a sort of hallmark almost of this is using a very neutral background, showing the plant in a sort of frontal and profile view, showing the plant in different stages of blooming. And so really, offering this kind of scientific accuracy that you can understand has this kind of educational value and sort of capturing a plant at particular moments in time so that people that maybe have never seen the plant in real life could kind of understand the life cycle. So Lincoln is certainly aware of that kind of style and that sort of botanical accuracy, I think you could say. He also he calls himself a poor botanist but a good photographer, which we have in the exhibition, and I just love that quote because I think you can, I think he's being a little understated. He is a really wonderful botanist, and he, was having conversations with leading botanists in Boston too as he's working on this project. And you can really tell that he is interested in being accurate, being scientific, and utilizing the camera as a tool to kind of enhance that accuracy, that it's this kind of mechanical reproduction, you could say. And so I think he certainly embraces that sort of lineage of botanical printing and then also the somewhat objective qualities that you get from photography as he's starting this or working on this project for decades. But it's not, he also doesn't let that limit himself too. I think he relies on the sort of accuracy of the camera to actually kind of imbue the plants with vitality, with life, and with a real personality. So there's this real, so he brings this botanical accuracy, this scientific knowledge, but he also really beautifully kind of marries it with this um, real intense kind of like aesthetic appreciation for the beauty of the plants. He works in a platinum printing technique all throughout his career, which is a really he used a large format camera that was 8 by 10 inches. He used glass plates that he would, create the negative with, and then he used a contact printing method where he would coat a piece of photographic paper with platinum and then press the negative with the paper. And with platinum printing, you get a incredible tonal range. These are all black and white works, but there is such vibrancy and like color, in the work itself. And so I think his technique really also allows a sort of a certain artistry to kind of enter into this kind of botanical accuracy as well. And so he really, has this kind of technical ability as well with this, beautiful subject that is, New England's wildflowers.
Thank you. He also, I think, uh, used that 8 by 10 camera did not have a shutter, correct?
Right.
How did that influence the work?
So he would, rather than using like a shutter like we're used to, or, in older cameras, and we even have on our phone, and it makes like a fake shutter in it, including the sound too. So which is so funny. His 8 by 10 camera, he just relied on essentially like a sheet, a dark sheet that he would sort of expose the negative to light, and then that would, that was part of his process. And so I think with that there's a lot more, and of course his camera was set up on a tripod. He created a sort of studio in his greenhouse, and so rather than having like a handheld point and shoot with a click of a button, this is much a really long process. It's like a studio portrait painting almost, or really older 19th century daguerreotype portraits where you have to set everything up, really set the stage, get your accessories if you're using them. In his case, make sure that the plant is in its kind of ideal stage, have just the right backdrop, just the right lighting. He always used natural lighting. And then it was a much more kind of slower process. And then he would set up his camera and then expose it. So it's really different than what we're maybe used to as we now even maybe photograph wildflowers in our backyards. This was a much more kind of like studied, um, very sort of particular way of working. And
Um,
he used that camera his entire career.
Well, Edwin Hale Lincoln was a drummer boy in the Civil War.
Mhm.
And of course, we know there was very interesting photography at that time that was sort of, yeah, it had to be a set piece. It didn't really capture action the way we think of it today.
Right.
Was he aware of that? I know it was years later that he began his work, but what would you say the influence was of his time, in the war?
Sure. So he continues working in this process of using glass plate negatives, platinum prints, well after World War One into the 1930s, when a sort of 35 millimeter camera has become much more popular and accessible and affordable. So he chooses to continue to work in this medium well beyond its sort of heyday. He also continues to work in platinum when it's one of the most expensive ways or um, um, ways of making an image as opposed to silver, which silver gelatin becomes the norm by the early 20th century. And so he is really dedicated to always working in this method throughout 40, 50 years. And it's a good question about his time in, the service in the Civil War. Other curators and writers have talked about him being so young and seeing so much death early on that he might have valued photography as a way to memorialize more than a sort of average person might. Not that he was alone, in experiencing the Civil War, but that he sees this sort of value in memorialization and preservation in the camera as a way to really aid in that process. He also earlier he photographed yachts and racing vessels in the late 19th century, and he also photographed many of the Berkshire cottages, many of the beautiful homes out in the Berkshires, and sort of photographing this kind of passing way of life, as he's making these images into the 20th century. And so I think he really values the time and the patience that working with this kind of large format camera, um, forces you to take. But that's a really great question. Yeah.
It's a way of keeping things alive, it seems to
Mhm. Yeah, and I think he says he values that, and you see that in his work, in his dedication to
me.
these topics.
You took him up to the 30s. If I'm not wrong, your own doctoral work involved photographic work in the 30s in that era. And
Mhm.
so is that continuum of sort of the social documentary angle, is that an intrinsic part of your curation?
That's a great question. And I think so my dissertation's on, documentary photography, street photography, really of the 1930s. And really, and always thinks about photography as a way of remembering and experiencing place in different spaces. So I have always appreciated in Lincoln's work his really documentary practice. He is creating a document that has value for centuries beyond. And so that sort of documentary mode, I think really drew me to his work. And of course, I'm looking at street photos of New York. These are, beautiful, kind of studio portraits of flowers in the Berkshires, but there is a certain kind of kinship in this kind of documentary mode, I think. And to his effort to kind of use these photos to teach, to educate, to communicate. We also see that in the kind of the work that was a part of my dissertation. So there's definitely conversations happening between these kind of unlikely folks, Helen Levitt in the 30s in New York and in Lincoln. But I always have a great appreciation for photographers that are able to really dig into a topic and show us the everyday in a way that we've never seen it before.
So can our Berkshires readers and viewers find most of these in the Berkshires versus the New England that's part of that? How much did he venture out, or how much actually was indigenous to the Berkshires in these flowers?
Yeah, a lot of the work of the flowers you can see in the Berkshires and in Massachusetts. So Berkshire County was definitely his most popular place to be making these photos. He also does go to Rhode Island, to New Hampshire, Vermont, and Maine. But mo most of what you can see, or most of what you see, the 400 plants in his project, you would be able to find in the Berkshires. And
What?
I
Go
I
ahead,
would
please.
just note too that um, a lot of his negatives have been digitized and they are on Digital Commonwealth. And at times, the specific place where he made the photograph is also noted on that sort of metadata, which is really fun to be able to see that. I mean, of course, too, he's making this 120 years ago, so plants that might have been more prevalent in the Berkshires maybe are not quite as common, and maybe their sort of typical habits have moved up to Vermont or something. So, but you can certainly see a lot of the flowers in the Berkshires.
What are your either artistic or thematic criteria for selection and for featuring of the work? What went into that for this exhibition?
Yeah, so I first came across this his series, Wildflowers of New England, Lincoln series, when I was pulling for a different researcher at my job, and I saw the spine of the book, Wildflowers of New England, and thought, oh, that sounds lovely. I'll take a look, do my own thing while I'm pulling for this other researcher. And then I looked at the book, and I was just astonished by the beauty of the flowers and of the photographs, and I just kept turning page after page, and each print was as beautiful and as like technically good as the last. And I had never seen milkweed look so almost angelic or lilies look like they were dancing. I really felt something when I looked at it, and which is always good, right? And so I continued to do more research and got to know more about Lincoln, realized that the Athenaeum had purchased this series, this 8 volume series, directly from the photographer right as he was publishing them, that this was also a self-published book. And so, thinking about the time and money and dedication to making something like this, I felt like there was more to the story. At the Athenaeum, the Boston Athenaeum, we try to really focus on local stories, artists that were important to Boston, Massachusetts, and New England, and getting to know more of Lincoln's work. It really felt like he was that, and that we were kind of uniquely situated to celebrate his work and celebrate this project that he spent decades working on. And so when I'm working on a project, if I'm, kind of blown away by the material itself and feel like there's a real kind of story there with the photographer and kind of the larger and our collecting habits at the Boston Athenaeum. That's sort of how that process works. And it felt really important to look at this project now, thinking as our climate continues to change, as the landscape continues to evolve, and as I think people are thinking of wanting to learn their in these own small ways how they can kind of make a difference and how they can educate themselves. So I felt like an artist worth exploring and also a good moment to be doing that work.
So you let us know there was some serendipity involved in the choice of this show. Can you tip your hand to what will come next in the fall? Is there serendipity, or can you reveal what will follow this show?
Yes, of course. So our next exhibition is my colleague, former colleague, Dr. Christina Michelon, is curating an exhibition called Alan Rowe Hancrite Griot of Boston. And it looks at this incredible artist, Alan Rowe Hancrite, who lived for almost the entire 20th century. He's a Black artist. Lives almost his entire life in Boston's South End neighborhood, where he dedicated part of his career really to documenting through watercolor, through drawing, through print, through painting his neighborhood in Boston South End. And so showing his kind of community of African Americans as this really beautiful, vibrant community that he was able to kind of really capture in a multitude of mediums. Later in his career, he also was a huge, incredible mentor to so many artists working in Boston, and his legacy is really continues and felt today. So we're really excited to celebrate his work. And again, um, focusing the Athenaeum felt like a really appropriate place to be celebrating his legacy, as we had a longstanding relationship with the artist and have the largest public collection of his work. So that will open in mid-October, I believe.
That sounds wonderful. It also sounds like a bit of a return to your roots in the type of work.
Yes, yes, but I'm not curating that show. That's
Okay,
colleague,
okay.
but I
Well,
am
we'll
happy to be cheering it along. And it's certainly the documentary nature is very resonant with my way of thinking, and the work is just stunning. So
thank you. Well, the last question in this era of digital, just as we're now in a Zoom virtual conversation, has this changed as a curator what you have to do to attract people in person to the Athenaeum, to how you engage people? What has changed, and that what has changed in how a
yeah.
curator has to think about how you bring people in and what you do with them when they're there?
So I mean, I love how connected we're able to be digitally, and I think that's something to be celebrated, certainly. But I think what we try to do when people come into the museum and to visit a gallery exhibition is see something that you could really only see in person, that could never really even be translated into a kind of digital format. So, for example, with the Lincoln exhibition, we included some of his original glass plate negatives that are backlit and sort of framed on the wall, along with his the sort of companion positive print. So we really try to get into kind of the hapticness of his process and the haptic quality of photography in our exhibitions. So really kind of give people a feast for their eyes with the work itself, but also make it so clear how handmade this work is, even though he's working in photography, which is technically mechanical reproduction in a sense. So really kind of highlight the handmade quality, the person behind all of these works that you're seeing, and really show them something that you can only experience in person, and really try to support an environment where visitors are able to spend time looking at work and, slow looking, and feel like they can perhaps become a part of the work itself.
Thank you. Thank you for this beautiful and meaningful exhibition. And I hope that our readers and viewers will get in person to the Boston Athenaeum.
Me
And,
too. Me too.
and thank you, Lauren Graves, very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Viewers, if you're already a subscriber to the Berkshire Eagle, thank you so much. It's how we keep local journalism alive and vibrant. If you're not yet a subscriber, please consider becoming one. I'm Dalton Deland. I'll see you next time on Eagle Reels and in the pages of the Berkshire Eagle.